Hello, welcome to News Center. I'm Parikshit Luthra. The ice may have started to melt on India and China's frosty ties 5 years after a normal engagement in Tamil Nadu's Mahabalipuram and days after agreeing on a border patrolling arrangement. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping met 4,000 kilometers away in Russia's Kazan. The clashes between Indian and Chinese troops at Eastern Ladakh's Galwan Valley in June 2020, one of the bloodiest in the nation's 7-decade-long border dispute, deteriorated ties. From that context, the development of this week at the Indo-China border may be a ray of hope. The Indian government on its side has maintained that both nations need to focus on implementing the arrangements on the ground. India's Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri has said that they are focused on disengagement, stressed that de-escalation will happen at an appropriate time. The Indian Army Chief has maintained that any disengagement, if at all, can only take place once the pre-April 2020 positions are restored at the Indo-China border in Eastern Ladakh. The big question we're asking, have ties between the nations turned a corner, or is it too early to speculate? Joining us right now, Anil Wadhwa, former secretary at the Ministry of External Affairs. We're also joined by strategic affairs expert Zorawar Daulet Singh. Let me begin with Ambassador Wadhwa first. Ambassador Wadhwa, do you think the fact that both leaders are having a bilateral meeting on the sidelines of the BRICS Summit in Kazan is offering some hope on revival of ties between the two countries? Because there is no clear blueprint of what really has been agreed upon and what happened behind the scenes.
So any positive news which comes out of the bilateral meetings between the officials on both sides, diplomats or the military personnel, is to be welcomed, first of all. As you rightly said, as the Foreign Secretary himself has briefed the media and others, that we are talking about disengagement, and de-escalation has to follow at a later stage. It remains to be seen, of course, what kind of progress is made, what the details are, because those have not been made public at the moment. But the fact remains that obviously there has been some amount of give and take in terms of the disengagement part itself, and that is good news. Going forward from here, once the talks do take place, and as they have already concluded, I believe, what comes out of these talks will be made known to us very shortly. And then we'll be able to gauge the future direction of India-China relationship, which has been fraught over the last 4 years, at least since 2020.
Ambassador Wadhwa, do you also feel that there is some amount of difference between what the Foreign Secretary said, that an agreement has been reached by the two countries after military-level talks, talks between the foreign ministries of the two countries, because the Army Chief went on to say that we were still maintaining our stand that we need to go back to status quo. That is a situation, patrolling situation, that existed in April 2020 before the standoff began.
Absolutely right. And I think the Army Chief is looking at it from the perspective of what the situation was in 2020. And the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Once we start implementing what has been agreed upon, we will know exactly whether it's a workable agreement that has been reached or not. There could be hitches. I'm not saying that that's not possible. But at the same time, as long as it is implemented in a proper spirit and manner, we would have made progress. And I think we should welcome that breakthrough. What happens in the future is something that still remains to be seen as to what is the degree of that breakthrough.
Right. Let me also go across to Zorawar Daulet Singh. Zorawar, looking at the way things have panned out over the next few days, it was very clear that any bilateral with President Xi will happen only and only if there is an agreement on the LAC. So clearly there has been some understanding which has been reached. But do you think, considering the long-term designs that China has had on the LAC, on different parts of the Indo-China border, can things be trusted? Can the Chinese be trusted at this point?
See, Parikshit, this crisis began because we have a much older 60, 70-year border dispute. There was never really a clear understanding of where the forces could be, especially over the last 10, 15 years as the militaries started to creep closer and closer to the frontiers. So the breaking point actually came in 2020, but it was leading up to it over several years. Uh, I think this agreement is a recognition that there needs to be now a new kind of a patrolling protocol system, a border management system. Both sides, I think, have faced the brunt of what such a large militarization of their such a massive frontier entails in resources, in lives, in terms of just sheer pressure on both militaries to maintain these front lines. So I think there is a common consensus now that they want to go back to some kind of a status quo that existed. But I feel for it to be really stable, they will have to devise protocols and norms to manage what are much more stronger militaries. This is not the India and China that formed those agreements in the 1990s. That was a very different balance of power. So today you have countries that are, these two are much, much stronger. So we're going to see definitely the details come through. But I think given the high level communications that have been already put across from both sides, and now the leaderships are going to sort of sanctify, legitimize, and give it a political sort of a blessing, so to speak. I think the bureaucracies and the militaries on both sides will start to implement it if that highest level political will is there, and it seems to be there.
Right. Do you also feel, Zorawar, that, since 2020, there have been 2 or 3 instances when the armies, the foreign ministries have announced that, yes, there has been disengagement at certain friction points. So now, how is this agreement that has been reached between the foreign ministries and the armies different from some of the announcements made earlier?
So this was primarily in the western sector of the India-China border, the Ladakh sector, which actually was the source of the original outbreak of war in 1962. So you've had several of these friction points in that particular sector, and gradually they began to be resolved in a step-by-step fashion over the period of 4 years. But there were certain areas like the Debsang and others where the Indian side was not getting to the April 2020 position, or even prior to that, where their forces would have access to these gray zones. So I think it seems the latest announcement that came a few days ago from our side and the Chinese side is that they have also resolved these last sticking points, which actually entailed very large areas of real estate. And from the Indian side, India was really being excluded and cut off from superior Chinese positions that have been built up militarily in those areas. So if the Chinese side have shown flexibility and concessions there, that also shows that they seem to be accepting that the LSC can go back to a kind of a normalcy.
Right. Let me go back to Ambassador Wadhwa. Ambassador Wadhwa, do you think this meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi and the consensus that we've reached on the kind of agreement arrangement we need for peace and tranquility at the border, could this lead to a revival of economic ties? The trade, if we see, the imports from China have continued to increase year on year despite the tensions that we had in Galwan in 2020. We've not been able to disconnect ourselves from the Chinese supply chain to the extent that we wanted. Do you think this will lead to a rethink as to how we want to work with China as a partner which invests in the country, or we collaborate with through joint ventures? Because the government is totally divided on that front.
I know, but the fact is that unless the leadership is speaking to each other, we cannot reach consensus on some very important sticking points in this relationship. If trade and the trade deficit is a particular problem, for instance, in the bilateral relationship, that needs to be taken up at the highest levels. And unless that is done, nothing percolates down, given the state of relationship between the two countries. So I'm certain that these sticking points will come up for a discussion. There are a number of areas where we can cooperate as well. And what kind of relationship will develop with China in the future is largely determined by the high-level talks which normally take place between two countries. It's okay that we have been talking at the official level for so far, but mainly those discussions have been focused on the border issue. We haven't actually been talking about the other sticking points in the relationship or the issues that arise from time to time. And it's high time that these are also discussed between the two sides. After all, engagement is the only way forward when there are issues between two countries.
Right. Ambassador Wadhwa, what do you think has really brought the two countries to this point? Yes, there have been at least 32 or 33 rounds of WMCC talks, maybe 25 rounds of high-level military talks that have happened since 2020, the Galwan clash between India and China. What are some of the geopolitical factors which you feel may have brought the country together to this point?
I think it's an ongoing, continuous process. And as far as this particular agreement is concerned on patrolling along the border is concerned, both sides have been talking to each other for a very long time. We expected that something would come out much earlier than what has happened right now. Unfortunately, that agreement could not be reached earlier on this point. But at the same time, there is a lot of churn geopolitically, which you rightly mentioned. There is obviously a need for India and China to be on the same page on many of these issues which confront the world today. Well, you take the conflict which is going on in Ukraine, you take the conflict in Gaza, or for that matter, the developments that have taken place between India and Canada, for instance, or India and United States, China and the United States, China and the West, and the fact that we have an important BRICS Summit which is taking place at the moment makes it imperative that the leadership starts talking to each other. So the agreement on the patrolling is, I think, quite timely. It was expected, but the fact that it's happened before the summit is certainly good news.
Right. Zorawar, who do you think has more at stake right now? Irrespective of the outcome of the US election, we believe that the trade war between US and China is all set to worsen, and India could fall a victim to that trade war because everybody will be caught up. Do you think India has more at stake right now, or does China have more at stake?
Yeah, I think there's a calculation now in both Beijing and Delhi that the United States is going through such an unpredictable phase of its political evolution that no matter who comes in into the White House, world order needs stability. It needs a steady hand of these rising emerging economies, which are now taking a bigger role in shaping what this next phase of globalization will be. So I think that's been the biggest driver, or one of the biggest drivers from the Indians and the Chinese side to also go beyond their bilateral problems, or at least to sort of call it a temporary truce for now and focus on these bigger themes, because these bigger themes ultimately are going to shape the extent of prosperity, modernization that India and China can attain in the coming decade or two. So the US factor, as I would say, even go beyond that. I think there is a power transition happening in the world today from the West to the East. I think so many people are alluding to it. But I think they weren't counting on the Asians and the Eurasians to be a little more aware and conscious and give expression to what is an overlapping interest. Because ultimately, disorder during the power transition, we've seen conflicts in Europe and the Middle East. The last thing we need is an escalation or a major military conflict happening in Asia, whether it's on India's frontiers or in the Western Pacific. So if India and China can play a role to stabilizing what is a completely chaotic world, and we could say even the West abdicating its role, I think that's the biggest contribution of this meeting between the Prime Minister and the Chinese President. And I think we will see the ripple effects will play out in the coming weeks and months.
Right. That is indeed an important point. And finally, Zorawar, if I could also ask you, how do you think this agreement between India and China is going to be judged by the Indian side? Because we've continued to see tension till probably the last month. We were seeing eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation in different points. How difficult would be actual de-escalation, induction and disengagement in all the friction points?
See, the process has begun. The moment the militaries of both sides are told by their political leaderships that we have now given a certain legitimacy, a certain sanctity to this process, then that automatically puts into place and prevents any kind of jostling at the local command level or the lower level. So once you have an overarching political vision that we are going to stabilize these frontiers, but of course we leave the details to be worked out by the militaries, then you will see a process that will play out in a much more constructive way. So I think that top level leadership that was missing in this equation will have an impact on the bureaucracies on both sides. Insofar as the Indian people or the average audience is concerned, I think they recognize that the China challenge is an important challenge, but I don't think they were obsessed or overwhelmed by it. I think the Indian people want to see security and stability on their frontiers, but they also want India to play a bigger role in this evolving world order, and they want to have some kind of a stable relationship with their largest neighbor. So if they see the government is pursuing those interests in a dignified way, is upholding India's territorial integrity, but at the same time is also being statesman-like or conscious of the bigger role that these rising Asian powers should play, I think they will welcome this development. I think there's no doubt that the government will have the backing of the Indian people, because this is not an emotive issue like, say, Pakistan, where you have sort of recurring weekly reminders of just the intensity of the venom that the other side has. This is a far more complex relationship, goes back to thousands of years, and that kind of complexity offers a window for a lot more creativity in, admittedly, what will be a competitive and a complex relationship.
We are getting these pictures right now from Mahabalipuram when Xi Jinping had visited India. There have been certain high-level engagements between India and China over the last few years, especially after the Galwan clashes at the level of foreign ministers. Military leaders have also been meeting. Do you think this will be one of the biggest geopolitical tests of Prime Minister Modi, Zorawar? How to manage the China relationship? As you said, it's a very complicated one, and managing it would be the biggest foreign policy challenge for the PM?
The way the Indian side has moved very, very cautiously. I mean, it's taken 4.5 years to reach the final conclusion of this standoff, assuming that the next steps play out. That shows that, of course, it's like once bitten, twice shy. They want to get it right. There, of course, will be problems further down the road if broader other third-party factors or broader changes in the international order begin to again unsettle the bilateral relationship. But for the moment, I think there's a calculation in Delhi that given the relationship with the United States, given emerging multipolarity, given India's stakes in the developing world, in BRICS, in playing, all these have come together to suggest that
Zorawar, I'd request you to pause for a moment. We're getting live pictures right now. The bilateral, we have been told, has concluded. So these pictures are coming in. Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping shaking hands. You saw Prime Minister Modi entering the meeting room, a conference room. He is flanked by the Foreign Minister, Jaishankar, on his side. Ajit Doval, the National Security Advisor. Vikram Misri, the Foreign Secretary, is also present. Xi Jinping can be seen leading the Prime Minister into the conference room. They're in front of the national flags, shaking hands, top-level leaders from both sides sitting across the table to review the latest agreement that has been reached. You see the Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson, Randeep Jaiswal, also there. You also have India's ambassador to China present in that meeting. And for the same matter, you will have delegates on the Chinese side. You'll have the Chinese Foreign Minister, you'll have the Chinese National Security Advisor, the Chinese Ambassador to India as well. All of them in that meeting, a very crucial one, which could possibly...
It's also important for both sides to shoulder our international responsibility set an example for boosting the strength and unity of the developing countries and to contribute to promoting multipolarization and democracy in international relations.
我愿同总理先生就两国关系和共同关心的问题交换意见。
Mr. Prime Minister, I'm prepared to exchange views with Your Excellency on our bilateral relationship and issues of mutual interest.
Excellency, आपसे मिलकर खुशी है और जैसा आपने कहा 5 साल के बाद हमारी फॉर्मल मीटिंग हो रही है। हमारा मानना है कि भारत और चीन के संबंधों का महत्व केवल हमारे लोगों के लिए ही नहीं लेकिन वैश्विक शांति, स्थिरता और प्रगति के लिए भी हमारे संबंध बहुत अहम है। एक्सेलेंसी, सीमा पार पिछले 4 वर्षों में उत्पन्न हुए मुद्दों पर बनी सहमति का हम स्वागत करते हैं। सीमा पर शांति और स्थिरता बनाए रखना हमारी प्राथमिकता रहनी चाहिए। म्यूचुअल ट्रस्ट, म्यूचुअल रिस्पेक्ट और म्यूचुअल सेंसिटिविटी हमारे संबंधों का आधार बने रहना चाहिए। आज इन सभी विषयों पर बात करने का अवसर मिला है। मुझे विश्वास है कि हम खुले मन से बातचीत करेंगे और हमारी चर्चा कंस्ट्रक्टिव होगी। धन्यवाद।
Right, there you have it. Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping making opening remarks. The Prime Minister has just said that mutual respect, mutual trust has to be the basis of any conversation, and this has to be a priority for India-China relations, and we will be reviewing the relationship right now in this particular context. We want peace and tranquility at the border, something that President Xi Jinping also said. A lot will be discussed as to the body language of the two leaders and what they say through their foreign ministries as well. That's all we have time for. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.